Welcome to Ask the Expert. Today is a very special guest, Nicholas Hopkins. He's the on-site foreman for Evergreen Architectural Arts, but he's also the winner of the 2022 Ladder Award from our magazine. Nicholas, welcome and congratulations.
Thanks for having me.
Okay, so why don't you tell me a little bit about how you got into the business to start with?
So basically, as far as restoration goes, I volunteered after Hurricane Katrina. Both of my parents lived in New Orleans.
Oh.
So when I was in high school, I volunteered with Acorn, and we did gut rehab in the 7th Ward, 9th Ward. That was about a week. I did that for a spring break. And then when I graduated with my undergrad, I came back to the area I live, which is Jersey City and, the greater New York City metro area.
Okay. I
started as a drug counselor, but quickly found myself sort of wanting to find some other type of civic engagement. And so I joined Habitat for Humanity as an AmeriCorps member. Okay. And it started out with affordable housing, which is Habitat's mission. And then Hurricane Sandy happened. And I believe 80% of our staff was from New York City. So we sort of put pressure on upper management to say, hey, this is serious enough and devastating enough for us to feel like we should do something. Not that affordable housing wasn't a worthy cause too, but I think it was like Staten Island, Far Rockaway, and Brighton Beach were areas that I think some of our colleagues lived in. And so they were saying, oh, it's like really, really bad. And we shifted for about a year and a half. And that was about 10 years ago. So started a little volunteering when I was in high school, but then I went into, as a career, into construction. And I think, unfortunately, the way hurricanes are happening, especially the intensity that they are happening, it just was by chance that I sort of was involved in a construction company that responded to a natural disaster in the New York City metro area.
Wow. So you wound up having direct experience on two of the biggest restoration events of probably the century so far.
And I actually, I was part of a news club. It's called 411, and I was in high school. So I actually filmed my volunteer experience and I interviewed people in New Orleans. And, it's one thing just to gut houses. It's sort of an empty feeling. There's no connection. But when you talk to the families, talk to people in the neighborhoods, it's a deeper connection. Obviously, a year of gut rehab and then the kind of Build It Back program that happened in New York City, that I just naturally came across a lot more families and was more involved in the actual kind of finish restoration of hurricane recovery work. So I was really, made a deep connection with people that I never knew, but also probably made me feel like restoration was something that I got more than just a paycheck out of.
Great. And when did you join Evergreen?
Almost 2 years ago. Okay. So it's in the middle of the pandemic.
Oh boy.
2020. Evergreen's like, what makes you leave one job during the pandemic to come to, arguably a far more higher tier as far as challenge restoration company? And I think my answer to the CEO at the time was I was outgrowing my last company, and I was building sort of a bunch of clients with side work, but I really liked doing the side work. I just didn't necessarily love the challenge of constantly finding more work or the paperwork or, kind of the administrative end.
Right.
And Evergreen is a company I had heard of after I got my master's degree at Tulane.
Okay.
And then between, I think it was 2017, I graduated from Tulane, to 2020, Evergreen had really exploded. From my point of view, maybe that's not what the founder would say. I mean, the company's 40 years old. So of course his opinion is that it's been growing for 40 years, but they had absorbed other companies that had visited Tulane. So when I looked at Evergreen's staff and noticed some really big names in restoration, I thought that doesn't make any sense because these people are directors of their own program. But Evergreen had actually started to take on more than decorative finishes and decorative plaster work. And so my background is more historic carpentry, historic stonework, historic metalwork, and that was something Evergreen was doing on a project called the Farley Post Office, which we won a Lucy G. Moses Award for, and that's across from Madison Square Garden. It's the I think the largest post office branch on the East Coast. It's not the headquarters, which is in DC. But Evergreen hired me from my previous company saying, we have 80 doors that are all white oak and mahogany veneered stave core doors. They're all historic, they're landmarked. And the real estate developer who bought Farley Post Office is going to get tax credits. So this needs to be done correctly. And there's going to be a consulting team going to be reviewing your work. So from that experience from my previous carpentry company, Evergreen was like, all right, we want to put this guy on our radar, or at least offer him a position. And that's how I started with them.
And what was your degree in from Tulane?
A historic preservation.
Historic preservation. Okay.
Yeah. So not necessarily hands-on. I was one of two hands-on people. Everyone else was architects, and other elements of like museum sort of staffing that required, a little bit of background. I would argue working at Evergreen, or even my previous company, or even my internship while I was in New Orleans, I probably was, as deep into the architectural restoration world than most of my other classmates. But it just wasn't their, direction and with their degree. But that's what the program, I would argue, at Tulane was focused on, mostly a lot of material analysis and studies of historic structures and, HABs reports, stuff like that.
Okay. And what are your day-to-day activities and duties like now? What is your role exactly at Evergreen?
Right now,
It changes every day, I'm guessing.
No, it doesn't change. I think the answer that my supervisors would give
Sure.
is that I am, a managerial position representing Evergreen.
Okay.
On these. I mean, the current job is at the Palace Theater. The Palace Theater in Times Square was lifted 30 feet in the air. And there's a gigantic hotel being built over it, but this is a landmark building, so they couldn't knock it over. But they wanted the bottom 2 stories for retail space. Okay. So their idea, which I've never heard of before, was lifting this massive building 30 feet in the air. It's insane.
Right.
And I was there not while it's being lifted, but before it'd been finished lifting. And so originally my job was to identify areas of serious stress that was being put on to the historic plaster surfaces inside the theater that were technically could have been historic, like just from the building being over 100 years old, or directly related to the lift. And then identifying what really ornate elements had to be stabilized during lift or pre-lift. And now, now I'm basically in charge of decorative plasterers, lathers, and then we have some straight painting. We haven't started decorative finishes yet because we're just because of dust control. We are waiting for all the plaster work to be finished. So there are days where I'm running around with a iPad and checking on probably over 20 people at the moment. And then I bi-weekly have a meeting where I review all of the work, all the methodologies, all of the sort of contractual work that Evergreen has agreed to with the ownership of the theater and the developers, and kind of give them bi-weekly updates on challenges, successes, my opinion on how to address things differently compared to the pre-lift. But today I was behind a historic plaster wall, daubing some of our newly installed casted plaster, because I'm one of the thinner, younger guys. But I would say
Okay.
typically, I supervise union plasterers.
Right.
So I'm non-union so that I can perform or direct multiple different trades. Otherwise, I'd have to stick in a trade. And my goal is really to make sure I don't send anyone home because we run out of work. And so I'm constantly trying to work with the general contractor or other trades to just keep the work in front of us, procuring material. And yeah, with bi-weekly meetings, we sort of always find more than I'd like to do in a week. But yeah, there are days, like I said, I walk around with an iPad, and there's days where I walk around with pointing tools or I'm casting historic plaster. But ideally, I'm letting the union guys do their work because I basically supervise dying trades, if I can be honest.
Right. I was going to say there are not a lot of people going into the decorative plaster trade right now, I would
No, and
imagine.
we hire plasterers. Decorative plasterers would be a pay grade up, and yeah, a very rare description. And I would say when people say, master carpenters, master plasterers, these are the masters of those trades. And yeah, there are almost, to be 100% honest, almost no young American tradesmen that are following in the footsteps of these men and women. And it to me, it seems like a very profitable future if I can really learn and nail
Yeah,
down what's the logic of the methodologies or the techniques. But it also worries me that COVID made, I don't know, a quarter of these men and women retire.
sure.
They were easily of retirement age. And yeah, it's an extremely international group, and English isn't always their first language. And so sometimes we're speaking with tools, and that means I have to really be, hands-on with them because they might not know how to explain this necessarily in a language I speak, but we do speak with our hands and with our tools a lot. And so that's sort of, one of the ways I've learned to, pick up some of this knowledge. And yeah.
You said you started out in drug counseling. What was your undergraduate degree in?
Criminology, criminal justice and criminology.
Okay.
So
So,
I got into drug counseling,
right.
and in New Jersey and New York, I don't think they were ready to take it quite serious. And I'm saying that as to say that, I was working double shifts, getting paid for one, and I was picking up the slack of a lot of my colleagues. And I was the most junior member of the company I worked for. And I also felt like I grew up with a lot of these guys that I was counseling. There's guys actually in the building I'm working right now that
Right.
were on my caseload.
Oh no.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, so this is why you should always just be a nice, honest person, because you never know when you're going to meet these guys again. And there's some big dudes, put it like that, like 300-pound big guys with rough backgrounds. And I took that job really serious. And again, to be frank, there was a lot of corruption. And so that's why I thought, why don't I work with Habitat for Humanity? Possibly I would feel a different experience, but able to address affordable housing and other kind of urban disadvantages that I grew up with in Jersey City, and a lot of these people that I grew up with. This was not that far of a reach from what I was doing as a drug counselor, but I clearly didn't see the same future that I saw when I was working at Habitat, which is why I just sort of, when I got my master's, it wasn't to further my criminal justice and criminology degree, but really to say, okay, this is a new direction I want to go in. And yeah, to be honest, I'm not really working on homes that deal with affordable housing,
Right.
like I did when I was working with Habitat. That was historic homes. Now I sort of have risen in the skill level where it's much more high end work, and it's
Sure.
Gramercy Park and Upper West Side, New York City, and state capitol buildings, and it's not affordable housing anymore.
Well, now that's so you have a somewhat unusual background. Do you feel having that diversity of experience helps you in your current role? Like you said, you run into people you worked with as a drug counselor, you have this experience working in with hurricane restoration, and now the historical preservation aspect of it. Do you think that sort of helps you in your current role, having that diverse background?
You know, whether this is appropriate or not, I had to fire somebody yesterday. Clearly, was we get drug tested on our
All
job
right.
site. So I basically been confronting a guy for 2 days saying, I'm not a spring chicken, and he's one of my best plasterers.
Sure.
So this was heartbreaking for me to do, but I had to basically pull him to the side and say, I don't feel like this is an average amount of exhaustion that you're exhibiting. I don't think you're doing something I haven't seen before. Unfortunately, bad habits are a common thing in construction.
Yeah.
Whether people want to sugarcoat it or not, it's a serious problem. We have a lot of alcoholism. We have a lot of opioid abuse. And I was seeing something that I thought put my coworkers at risk. I was seeing something that would tarnish my reputation as a foreman. And I gave this gentleman 2 days. I gave this gentleman Friday to come clean to me
Right.
without blacklisting him on major jobs, because he's a union member. This is bad for him.
Right.
And I told him, man to man, I said, hey, I understand. This guy's like, what, 20 years older than me? So
Right.
I know I'm 33 and you got kids and you don't want to hear it from me. But I'm not going to look good as a supervisor if I got guys, no matter how good of a plasterer they are, if they are using on the job site. And again, not using outside of work, they're using actively on the job site. So yeah, I had to confront him one-on-one without really getting him in trouble. And then he said, I'm really tired and just take the weekend to rest up. I said, all right. But I said, by Monday or Tuesday, if I feel like nothing's changed, I am going to bring you to the general contractor's medic, who randomly drug tests us, and initially drug tests us when we start the job. We get breathalyzed and drug tested. And I said, if you do not pass that test, I am not going to continue hiring you. I can't, it's not even up to me. The general contractor is like, there's zero tolerance. So yesterday, I unfortunately had to, take it that direction. And, he, up to the point of when he had to take the drug test, he said, I'm going to pass. And he essentially refused to take the test, which is unacceptable. You either test negative or you don't work. And yeah, he refused to attempt to test negative. And I talked to him today about it. I said, you have to understand, this is, I hold you accountable as a plasterer, and I get held accountable as a foreman. And we're also doing work on scaffold. We're using power tools. We are working as teams, passing heavy material to each other. If somebody was inebriated to a point that would put someone in danger or would get yourself injured, A, you wouldn't be able to file for workers' comp. And B, if you were to get someone injured who wasn't okay or wasn't under the impression that their coworker was under the influence, I would look like I wasn't doing my job. So, and he told me today, he said, yeah, I get it. I'm sorry. So, I'm building that rapport with people too. It's like,
Right.
I can joke around with you. I can, there are times where I can, not be absolutely insane about accomplishing things by end of day. But, they're there to work. They are guns for hire. So in theory, if they're working for us, they can't find work elsewhere. So my job is to keep them busy. And like I said, even though we have fun, or even though we, there was a guy's birthday today, we sort of had a little celebration for him, which is, not part of that's not technically under my job title to throw birthday parties.
Right.
But we did one because I thought that gentleman deserved it, and I thought the crew deserved it. So yeah, this is just sort of part of the game. You reward people for doing good work, and you also hold people accountable if they are veering off of the responsibilities we have as co-workers on a dangerous job site.
Where do you see yourself going? People hate this question, but where do you see yourself going? This is it's called the ladder award because the people are climbing up the ladder. Where do you see yourself going?
It's a good question. I think, it's like probably my least favorite thing to do is to write about myself, which I had to do for this award. I was nominated by my supervisor.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think for me, the trajectory is, continue doing something I love, which for a very long time, I want to say I only did like modern construction for about a year until Hurricane Sandy happened.
Right.
Meaning I'm working on homes that had grandfather clauses for their construction. So I'm rebuilding homes immediately into my small construction career that are historic, right?
Right.
So for 9 years, I've enjoyed what I've been doing. So I see myself in the future continuing to surround myself with historic projects, and I would say humbly being somebody who's never saying that can't be done, or that's not worth the time it takes to save or salvage historic materials or systems, especially if they're landmarked like theaters or sacred spaces like churches and mosques and temples. But considering the trajectory has been, someone who knew nothing to someone who was a helper to someone who was, lead carpenter, or, the last job as a carpenter, I was a minor mini project manager and a carpenter. And I see myself sort of, now that I'm a foreman, I could say like consulting for the sake of saving spaces, intervening in situations where I think people want to say, just throw sheetrock up or just cast that out of fiberglass.
Right.
Right. It's not, I don't want to say the easy way, because most historic restoration is never the easy way.
Right.
But when I'm surrounding myself with projects that are landmarked or they're being reviewed by, the National Park Service, I am putting myself in a corner where there is serious reward for tax credits. And therefore, I think, continuing the direction of some managerial role where I can keep tradesmen and tradeswomen feel like they are contributing to a project that is a restoration of something that is 100 years old and will continue for another 100 years if the right work is done. So I think I told my last boss I want his job, right? I don't necessarily think I mean that, but I think the goal is, I don't see a ceiling, but I really like being on site. I think being on site allows me to say, these are your options.
Okay.
These ones respect historic techniques and spaces the most. These are the fastest ways of doing things, and these are the most affordable ways of doing things. I think the farther I get away from being able to throw my 2 cents in and not at minimum being a consultant would sacrifice the ability for some of these historic spaces to have a chance that I think I'm giving them at the moment. So I haven't really thought a tremendous amount about it, but I think a lot of people think as a foreman, I'm contributing a lot to saving spaces. And obviously everybody wants to get paid more, especially the more sort of raising a family gets more expensive. And
right.
I don't want to fool myself that I can't make more money doing something on a little bit more higher level of restoration. But like I said, I think my personality, and kind of back to me being a drug counselor, me being able to problem solve personality issues as well as hands-on and historic system issues allows me to shine on a job site, and then allows these historic spaces to survive. So yeah, we'll see. I'm not a I'm an extrovert, so sometimes people put me in positions just to represent companies, which is, the project manager in my company should be doing these walkthroughs with me. But I get along with conservators and architects and structural engineers really well.
Okay.
So they say, just send him in and he'll represent the company well. He'll meet halfway with the design team that's going to basically give us a hard time about how to do things.
Right.
And that makes the general contractor happy who hired us. And that makes the families who own the theaters, the Nederlanders and Schuberts, that makes them happy because they're like, hey, this guy's doing his job for his company, but he's also looking out for us and allowing these theaters to exist, like I said, for another 100 years in the condition that everybody wants to see them, which is restored and beautiful.
Now, you have, like I said, he had an unusual background. Most people aren't going to be able to volunteer on hurricane restoration, work as a drug counselor, and then get a master's in historical preservation. But what advice do you give to people who are maybe entering this field right now, whatever their background is? What advice would you give to a young person who said, I'm starting in restoration, what should I do?
Yeah, I've thought about this a lot because some of my colleagues or my former peers at Tulane were like, oh, you need to go back to Tulane and speak because you're doing something that is like, and again, I'm saying this humbly, this is not my words. I think a lot of my peers are like, you're doing a level of restoration that people claim they'll be able to achieve if they graduate the program we were in.
Right.
So like there's a lot of architects I work with that are doing, minor residential architectural work that sometimes involves historic systems and elements. But those same architects are saying, Nick, when are you going to speak at Tulane, or when are you going to speak at Columbia or whatever? And that's not really like something on my bucket list. But I do think what I would tell people who are starting in historic restoration is that you cannot like it, you must love it. And the reason I say that is there are going to be days where you prepare to accomplish whatever that may be. And that day comes for you to lead or start a job or a project, no matter what element you are within that task. And it's not going to work out the way you want it to. The general contractor is going to throw a wrench into your system. And like I described what was happening at my current job, you have members of your team doing things that are inappropriate. And unfortunately, you're cutting people that are, supposed to be the leaders of your trade.
Right.
And so when I say you got to love it and not like it, I mean, you've got to find a way to pull yourself out of these moments where you want to give up, where you basically convince yourself that it's not worth it. It can't be fixed. There can't be, new ways of looking at how to address this problem. And let's be honest, part of historic restoration, unfortunately, is about safer materials and safer work conditions.
Right.
And so how do you work around lead paint and not put people at risk? And that's why, maybe 60 years ago, people said, just sand it or just rip it out, or, and if you really love what you're doing in historic restoration, you're going to prepare yourself and prepare the project to not fail. But I'm warning those people, you're going to be heavily disappointed, more often than you want to be. And that doesn't mean you just say, well, screw it, I guess this is impossible. Because in my opinion, we are continuing a part of construction that respects, really masters of their trades, and in the world of arts, people that I have, every time I open up a wall and see how people did carpentry or how they hung historic plaster, I'm like, okay, how do I do that in 2022? And I think, like I said, the answer is not giving up and finding out what's available to do what you were hired to do, and leaning on people that I've worked with in the past. So I worked with a master blacksmith. I call him all the time when I got ironwork problems, and he still picks up. Me and him had a great relationship. I worked with a master carpenter, and again, I'm calling these guys master carpenters and master blacksmiths.
Right.
And that's because you look at these gentlemen and you go, wow, they are doing something that no one does anymore. So when I really get into a rut, I call them and go, here's my problem. Yes, you're not going to get paid to answer this, but if you want to save these elements, like I know these guys want to save in historic spaces,
right?
They see within me a new generation of people who love doing this work, and they give me their 2 cents. I add that into the equation of, again, what's my budget, who I work with, what's available, in the tri-state area, which is a lot. And then I present that to the client, and I say, this is how I'm going to do the job you want me to do, with respect to the elements of this of these spaces that I would argue are an example of beautiful historic spaces.
Great. Well, you answered all my questions. Anything you'd like to add before we go?
Anything I'd like to add? I think, I just want to harp on the fact that I often get asked, are there any young American people working with you on these job sites? And I think the reality is, I think right now I have one gentleman who might be in his 30s.
Okay.
And when I say American, I mean like people who aren't going to then, who aren't flown in to do specialty work and then are flying back to their country of origin, right?
Right.
We are a nation of immigrants, and I descend from that myself. But there's this, and it's not just historic trades. There's a serious concern that we will not have decorative plasterers or decorative finishers or historic carpenters, blacksmiths, in the future, stonemasons, and I encourage people who are in high school and don't know what they want to do in their future to not necessarily just look at historic trades, but look at trade schools and do what I did as a young teenager, which was walk around New York City, fall in love, and I think I can be honest, fall in love with the older, more decorative sort of facades of buildings.
Sure.
And decide whether I want to see those spaces disappear and have no ability to make a difference, or whether I directly want to get involved, like I've done, and say, what can I do to save this facade, or what can I do to be a voice that will support historic restoration or remediation of a space that allows people to continue to go to the theaters or worship in their respective sacred spaces and take trains in these old buildings that people just say, just knock them over. And I would argue it takes a new generation of people that are, 10 years, 15 years younger than me, that are hopefully long-term residents of this country that continue to feed the pipeline of hands on and craftsmen and women who are able to allow these places to survive. So, yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you for taking the time to speak with us today, and congratulations again on your award. And I look forward to seeing you. You're going to be in Las Vegas to accept it in person?
I believe so. I
Okay.
think this is in September.
Yes.
Yeah, I believe so.
Okay.
I think my girlfriend's a public school teacher, so as long as it doesn't,
Right.
yeah, it's that Labor Day weekend.
It's right after Labor Day.
Yeah, it's right after Labor Day. So,
Yeah.
she's a big cheerleader of mine, and so she's like, if you go, I'm going. So as long as there's nothing in my schedule, or put it like this, as long as Evergreen isn't in such a bad place on this current project that I'm at,
Right.
that I can't leave. I just took vacation for 2 weeks, and when I came back, they were like, "No more vacations," which is a joke, but at the same time, I think it's a compliment to what I add to the team. So yeah, the goal is to be there in person for sure.
Okay. Well, great. Well, I hope to see you there.